Assalamu alaikum friends and welcome back to the channel. Always with Younes Charfaoui. In this video, we are going to explore one of the best APIs or libraries about testing in Kotlin. Let's get started. So the library we are going to use is called Kotest. This is one of the best libraries about testing in Kotlin. Like you already know, JUnit 5 or 4, but this one has massive flexibility in terms of the things you can do and also expressiveness in a Kotlinish way. All right. So this library actually encompasses 3 different things. It has a testing framework, assertion library, and also property-based testing. This kind of different way or different paradigm to do testing when it comes to testing, right? We are only going to explore this test framework. If you want me to do a specific video about property-based testing, let me know below in the comments. We shall explain this strategy and also how to implement it via something like this Kotest, all right? So first, let's proceed with the setup. I already did the setup in my case. So in the setup, I'm using a brand new Android project. You can use it in Kotlin. By the way, this is a Kotlin multi-platform library, okay? So we can use it here in our case. So what I do have 2 examples I want to share with you. First, I have a library example, like this is a sample thing. There's a borrower, there's book, borrower, and library service. Like this is a pretty simple thing. And also a shopping cart in which you can add stuff, calculate prices, do checkout, and similar stuff. So here in the libs, I'm adding the dependencies, right? So you can notice that the dependencies here, you only need this one actually. You only need the runner. As I said, the assertion and the property are extra thing, all right? And also you can use this assertion library with JUnit, for example. You can do that also, all right? So I'm adding these libraries like that in the following. Also, I noticed that we need this library in order to run one test by the other. I had this problem. I added the Kotlin Reflect library. All right. So make sure if you have this issue, I will point to the issue later on, but this is one of the things I added. And also I made everything as a bundle. Okay. So at the end of the day, it will be used like the following. It will be used here. You can use it for test implementation, for Android test implementation, like using it as part of your instrumental test. There is an actual extension. I'm going to tell you about extension later on because it isn't straightforward how to add this one with the instrumental test. For the moment, we are going to use it for local tests, like you can see here in this example. All right. So this is the beauty of bundles. Next, you need to add this one for the tasks because under the hood, the Kotest, we use the JUnit Gradle plugin. So we need to make sure for this also. All right. Let's write our first test. I'm going to write a simple test here. So just to get started. So this is a simple test. So this is the first thing to understand. Kotest come with something called styles. Okay, we don't have any annotations for the moment. Like we don't have annotation to run tests. Okay, we have different styles and each style allow you to write tests in a given manner. Okay, let's start with the simple one, which is function test or fun test. Okay, this is function test. Okay, so always we need to extend from this one. We need to extend from it. There is something called fun spec. All right. And here you do the following and the following. All right. So you write the test inside this constructor lambda because this one will run in the init. Okay. You can do it like that. Or for example, you can remove it from here, make it a simple thing. And then in the init, you shall start writing your test. Your tests are simple. You shall call the method called test here, give it a simple string, and you can run your test. Okay, this is for example one test I think the AI is giving me. I don't know. You can start doing this test, for example. But the beauty what I'm telling you is that you only need to run this test function. Give it here, for example, first test, and then we need to run it. Now for the running part, I will show you because this button won't be shown by default. Okay, so let's run the test here. Let's check. Actually, this is testing anything. Okay, so you can see the test is passing. Like I just wanted you to see how you can write the test. Okay, we can do it like that as following, but most of the time, a lot of people doing it the other way around. They write their test here inside this one. I don't know, like because this is a new style, maybe you wouldn't like it, but what will happen under the hood is that the function body you pass it will be part of the init. All right, so that's pretty much it. All right, so this is the way on how to start writing tests. But actually, this is only one style for writing tests, okay? There are many ways to write tests, so this will depend on you. For example, if you go here and you go to the framework and go to something called testing style, you will see there are many testing styles. The beauty about this Kotest is that they try to learn about all the other framework of testing in all other languages, for example. They will grab some good thing from PHP unit, for example, from Ruby testing, from JavaScript testing. Like they wanted to kind of accumulate all the extensive knowledge of the community and the experience about building a good library for testing, and they wanted to reuse the good parts. Okay, so this resulted in this kind of library. Okay, so there are many things. For example, there are string spec. For example, with this string spec, you can do the following. Let me change it. You only need to change it here, string spec. And then the way to write tests, simply by writing test first, for example, like the following, and you do it like that. Okay, this will be dependent on you because you need to choose a style and you work with. And this also will need to be a team decision. All right. So this is string spec, for example. One of the good spec there is something related to behavior-driven development, which is BDD test. So you can do behavior spec like the following. And guess what? You can write something called given something. The beauty, what is really, really cool is that you can start nesting things in. All right. So what do I mean by that? You can say given, I have a library. What you can do is that you can, in the given, you can put two tests, right? So it will be executed as part of the given. Given I have a library, I can do the when, this one. Of course, the when problem is that this is a reserved keyword. You have to do it with this backticks. When I add a book, for example, then this function will be executed. I can nest other than inside the same when, like that. And I can nest other whens inside the same given. I can do this one like the following. I remove a book. I don't know. This is just an example, guys. I'm just exploring this library for you. So you can notice that there is this kind of scoping thing, right? You can give something inside certain scope. And this is a cool thing actually when it comes to testing. I'm going to add just one thing. I'm not sure about whether this will pass or not, but this will run it. I'm running it as part of this one. Actually, as I told you, like here's the thing. There is this given, this one, and there is two things here. Of course, here I made a problem. I wrote same test name, okay? But the library is intelligent to add certain stuff here. All right, so that's pretty much it on how to start using the library. Now we are going to understand certain stuff. First thing, you won't see this icons by default here, all right? This is problematic, but in order to do that, you need to install the plugin that comes with this library. Go to your settings and then go to your plugins. And here in the plugins, just search for CodeTest. Okay, there is this big plugin of CodeTest. This is the main one. This will add several stuff. One of those, you can start running tests by one. Okay, so using this plugin, you can actually run the tests easily from this buttons here. Now, there is one actual problem with the API itself. It's still an open issue on GitHub. When you run certain nested tests, and there is an object that is used from the outside, for example, this library service is used from this one, the test won't pass. The problem is that for this kind of test, it is running it with Gradle, but with this test, it's running it with CodeTest. This is a little bit problematic. So this isn't mature enough to use it for this one, but you can run all the tests and that would be fine. All right, I'll show you a way on how to perform one single test, for example, here in a second. All right, so this is one thing about the cool thing about the plugin. The other thing about the plugin is that when you click here on the code test, you can notice all the tests you have. Okay, this is a beautiful thing. But as I told you, you can't simply run them from here. The beauty, you can run it with coverage also. This is a cool thing directly from here. And you can perform other stuff with expanding, filtering, and doing other stuff with this plugin. So this is regarding the plugin. Now let's create another file for the tests. I'm going to test library service feature test, and you are going to use another type of testing called feature spec. All right. So with the feature spec, you can do something like the following. You can create a feature and you can give it scenarios. Okay. This is one of the cool things also about testing. Like some people prefer this kind of test, right? So you can create a context or a bigger scope here, and then you can add scenarios to that feature. So you can create multiple features. This is another cool spec. As I said, there are many specs here. There is fun spec, the normal spec, there is word spec, simple text, there is describe spec. This is same as previously as we do it. JavaScript, I think. Yeah, JavaScript. There is free spec, there is shoot spec, there is other specs. Try to explore them. We are not going to explore everything. Now I want to talk about something called properties or configurations, right? So for this feature, I can disable it and enable it via certain stuff. For almost all spec, there is this kind of config, okay? Here in the config, you can enable many things. First thing, you can use the enabled. And this enabled, you can enable it, the test or not. You can enable the test, for example, like following, or you can disable it. Okay, so this, by consequence, it will disable everything. So if I want to enable only this test, for example, I can copy this one and make the enabling here. Okay, so I don't want to run this one. So when I run everything, I'm going to run this one and you are going to ignore this one. Okay, but as I said, if you try to run one single test, it will crash because it will tell you like I couldn't find this class. Yeah, library spec. Wait a minute, library spec, I think. It will tell it won't able to locate the library service. Exactly, there is this problem of no class definition. It has problem with reflection because as I said, it's using the code test. It's still an open issue. If you want to decide, you can omit it for that issue until they fix it. All right, so you can of course run everything. So you notice that we can eliminate or ignore this test. Okay, this is an actual cool thing you can do for every specific test. For the config isn't for the enabling or only. There are many things. You can determine the number of invocation. I want to run this test, for example, invocations for 7 times. Okay, if it fails in one only, it will consider it as failure. Okay, so it will run it 7 times. So this is kind of a way to tell like I only want this to pass 7 times, so I can make sure I'm confident enough that it's passing. Especially if there is something dependent on random stuff, maybe non-deterministic tests, of course. Okay, there isn't only that, there is timeouts. This is also a good thing. Timeout, I don't want this test to take more than 100 milliseconds. The beauty is that they are using Kotlin duration API, so I can make something like that. Milliseconds, and this will time out in 100 milliseconds. If it doesn't pass in 100 milliseconds, for example, how much taking 15 milliseconds, right? Let me do it. Okay, let me enable it first, and I can make it in 10 milliseconds. So we can run it in 10 milliseconds. Let me run everything. Okay, I can run it from here. Okay, it is passing. That's pretty weird. It is 2 milliseconds. You can't do less than that, but I hope this shows you how you can do that. Okay, there is timeout for this one, and I think there is big timeout. Okay, this is one cool thing. There is kind of specification or configuration stuff dependent on the spec itself. So if you do this, there is, for example, timeout here. This timeout is for the whole test. Okay, so if I want this to pass in 10 milliseconds, literally, okay, the problem is that this one is duration, so I want it to pass in less than 100 milliseconds. For the moment, it is passing the whole 23 milliseconds. Okay, let's do 10 milliseconds, run everything. It should crash, it shouldn't pass exactly initialization error, timeout, waiting for 10 milliseconds. Okay, but as far as you understand, this one is coming for the spec. Okay, this configuration is for the spec. So you can notice there is configuration for the spec and configuration for the individual tests. And you can go here to the parameters and notice there is threads, number of threads. There is enabled if, like this is a lambda, you can enable tests based on something. You can extract it and put logic in all your test suite to enable and disable it. But the beauty about this one is that you get the test as parameter. So the name, the certain stuff, you can basically disable and enable based on certain condition. Invocation timeout. Okay, so there is this invocation timeout and there is this timeout, right? So for this invocation, if you remember, we did 7. I can do invocation timeout. So for each one of those, it's going to take 10 milliseconds for each one of the 7. Currently, the whole 7 is taking less than this timeout. But if I want to be specific about each timeout, each invocation, how much time to take, I can do that with the invocation timeout. There is coroutine scope. If you want to use coroutine scope, by default, as you can see, we are using coroutine scope. There is something called here test scheduler, test coroutine scheduler, and you can do normal stuff, advanced until idle, the normal stuff you use. Of course, this every time you have to opt in for certain stuff. Let me check this one. Why this one isn't working? Okay, it accepts something, of course. But this wouldn't work immediately. You need to add that you are using the coroutine scope here, okay? Otherwise, it will crash, okay? So as you can see, there is this config for the whole spec, all right? Now, let's pretend you want to do config for the whole tests you have in this module, for example. For that reason, there is something we call configuration for the whole project. You simply do it by creating an object, let's call it config, like the following. And here, okay, this can be an object. You need to extract for something called abstract project config, all right? And here you will find many properties. If you do Command O and try to put everything, okay, there will be many things, all right? So for example, like it's too much for the moment. For example, let me just do that. There is timeout, for example. You saw the timeout, right? This timeout is for the whole project. So you can set the timeout, like I want my duration of the test for the whole stuff to be 10 minutes, for example. All right. So this one will make sure that the whole test in my test suite will be just 10 minutes. So you can see that this is one of the things I like about this library. It enables you to do many things pretty much easily. Okay. But for this to run, you need to do the following. Create a resource folder in your project and add these properties because we need to scan it. This one will have many configuration stuff. And one of the things you can add is this config object, right? So you need to add this so it can use this object. At the start, it will scan this one and use it, all right? There is many things regarding these properties. As I said, you can specify them here, but also you can specify them here. So if you check here in the library, you can go to configuration and then go to project level setting. Here, you can notice that you can do the following, all right? Parallelism, for example, 3. This is also a cool thing. Property, assertion mode, error, if there is problematic, assertion mode for the build, fail to build, all right? And there is this good thing also, fail on ignore test. When you ignore certain tests, you can make it fail. This is a cool thing. And there is system properties. These are the system properties I showed you earlier. There is many properties here. I invite you to go and check them by your hand, okay? Because many things, timeout, parallelism, same thing is specified here. You can specify almost here, but not everything. All right, so let's pretend, let's try this one. Let's do 5 milliseconds for the whole test. And let's run our tests. It shouldn't pass exactly, waiting for 10 milliseconds. Okay, but what about this one? For 5 milliseconds, which we defined here, the whole thing. And you can specify many other stuff. So this is for the configuration. Now let's get back to the testing part. One of the things they do have about this one, something called X out. I can do X given. What does this mean? As you can notice, is that I'm ignoring it. Okay, so you can do it in the config because this one doesn't have a config, right? But you can do it with this X. You can X the given, X the then, and X the when. The when is problematic. You have to do it like that. But right now, you don't have to use it because X1 isn't the thing. All right. This is related to the scope. It's not problematic. If I do X here, everything will be X'd out, right? Even though I'm not Xing, I'm not putting this out, the whole thing will be Xing this thing. But if I put the X here and remove it, it will be for only this test. If I do X here, it will be for both tests, right? Let me delete this one. Okay, it's not showing. Exactly, you can notice it here. Other thing, in this specific behavior spec, you can use given with big G. So you don't have problem with the when. Okay, same thing for the then. This is also fine. And then you can do extend. Almost all of them have this thing. If you go to the feature spec feature, you can do X feature. So it will drop this X feature, X scenario, and same thing, right? So this is one feature they do have in this library, which is X and out. For the test that doesn't have, I don't have a simple test, right? Let me pretend I'm having a fun spec, right? So let me just comment on this code. Okay, I just removed it. Let's use this fun spec here. You can notice that with this fun spec, I have only tests. I can't nest things into things, right? But if you want to do so, you can create a custom object called context. And here in that context, you can add certain stuff so you can include the execution. Of course, I have to name it something. Hello, suite, for example. So I can test, like have things related together. Like we saw with the describe, like we saw, sorry, with the behavior-driven development, for example, or feature spec. Okay, and the same thing, you can do X context, X test, for example, and you would be fine. There is another way to kind of this, they call it band tests, right? So you can do the following. If you put it like the following, this one, it will ignore everything. So if I try to run this one, nothing will pass or nothing will run, sorry. But if I remove it and put it here, I will ignore it. So this is another way to ignore tests as compared to, what's that actually? Okay, let me just remove this one because this is weird. 10 minutes, sorry. Like the following, let me run everything. For the simple test, exactly test 2 isn't passing. You can notice that test 2 isn't passing because I'm using this one. As I said, this is called banning. If you want to run specific tests, but this is actually to the top level stuff, like if you have the following, right? Let's add another test, 3 for example, like that. And I want to run only this one. You can do F2 points like that. And if you try to run it, this is kind of called focus, right? So if you focus, you will run only this, and by default, all of those will be ignored. So sometimes you want to run specific tests to make sure that it is passing. This is actually one way to solve the problem you have about not able to run this test only. So you can run everything and make sure to only focus on it. Okay, you can use, as I said, the X for ignoring certain stuff, and this focus and ban to ban certain tests. So I want to run everything except this one. So this combination of the methods and the tools you have, like this is one of the things I like about this library, enable you to do many certain stuff. All right, so this is regarding banning. One of the things many people ask about, how can I do before tests, like the previous way, before tests? By the way, there is one annotation you can do. It's called annotation spec. People love annotation spec, right? So with this annotation spec, you can do it like the following, the normal, and guess what? Let me delete this thing. I can do the normal test, guys. Test, but make sure you are getting this from the annotation spec, exactly. And you can run your test the usual way, and you can add the test, and the test will be passed normally. Like I said, they try to encompass all of the methods, all of the good ways that the community are using for running the tests. Okay, this annotation spec, and here you can use before each, for example. I think this is before each, and here make sure you are getting it from the code test. Okay, so you can perform this before each and after each, I think, after test, no, after each. Here the annotation spec, you can see there is before all, okay, after all, before all. Like you can notice there is ignore, you can ignore certain stuff, so you can use this one also. But for the other tests, there is this function called after test. So it will be simple lambda. You can do it after test. The beauty about this thing, here you get tuple of two things. You get the test case. If you do put the it, there is A, which is the test case. This test case will give you many things. The name, the parent, the type. For example, for this one, the parent will be this one. Like you can perform conditional stuff for certain tests. Also, you will get the test result, whether it has passed, has an error, the duration, success, reason, maybe. So this is up to you on how to perform this kind of tests. All right, so this is after test. You can run before test. Of course, before test, you'll have only the test case. So you can have the spec. What is the spec? What is the test name? What is the descriptor? Many, what is the test type? Okay, that's awesome. Like you can get many callbacks in here in this feature spec. All right, another thing, let me just show you for this config, right? For this config, as I said previously, you can pass enabled, you can pass a lot of stuff. You can create actually an object for this configuration. So you can do test config if you want to share it across many things. So you can do test config like the following, test config, and here you will have everything. For example, the enabled part, which is true, for example. You can have invocation, like you want to share the same config across many things. So you can pass the test config like the following and pass it also here instead of repeating it 2000 times. Okay, so this is one way to share configuration. Another feature they have, which is a cool thing also, there is something called tag. Exactly. Here, each test can have certain tags, right? You can create a tag, I think it's called name tag. Okay, let's pretend I'm having a tag called, I don't know, coroutines, for example. I can do the following. I can add tags to certain configuration. For example, for this scenario, specifically, I want to add a config. In this config, I want to add tags. The beauty is that it accepts a set of tags. I can do set of and pass this tag, or let's call it coroutine. Okay, so this tag I'm having here, right? For example, in another test, completely different place, in the simple test here, for example, let me just remove that. Let's add another example. Let's add the same thing on the same class, for example. I can, in this configuration, this is simple string example. By running the string, here you can add configuration. I can put tags here and the same thing, set off, and I can pass coroutine tag. Okay. Beauty with the library right now, if you have many scattered coroutine tests and you want to make sure that the coroutine tests are passing correctly, you can simply tell the library to run only the tests that have coroutine. Fortunately, you can't do this by hand. You have to do it by Gradle. All right. So for this one on the tags part, okay, it need to show that what tags I'm having. So the tag here isn't shown for some manner, but you can run it with Gradle, as I said. Here, if you go to the library, go to the framework and go to grouping test. This is a feature for grouping test. Here's, for example, what they are doing. They're creating Linux and Windows based tests, so you can run them separately, or you can create it like that. The same thing we did. All right. Then you can do the following. You can run Gradle test. And part of this one, I want to run Linux and not database tests. Okay, so this is kind of querying which tests you want to do. This is an awesome feature we really needed previously. So grouping the test based on certain criteria like database, Linux, for example. For my side, I don't know, I can run only view model tests or some kind, can run only coroutine based tests. I want to check that coroutine flow stuff is working fine. So this is pretty awesome. Of course, that way we can do many things with this thing. Okay, as I said, you can put here, but if you want to put a tag for everything, I think you can use tags like that. Exactly. And here you can pass coroutine tags, you can pass other stuff normally, same way you did here. But this will be enabled for everything. All right. Other parts, I think you can tag it like the following. You can tag it like that, and you shall give it the name of the tag actually like that. Okay, so with this thing in mind, you can run this based on this tag. Okay, so this is a different way on how to group your tests. And also some people ask how to test exception. This is part of the assertion itself. So you can do should throw something, should throw, or should not throw, but this is part of the assertions. Okay. That's why it isn't here. So for example, should throw this one, and I can put a legal format exception. I can put the code here that should throw this one. Then I will have the result here. This will give me a result. I can also make assertion, the message, the cause, like everything. Okay. This is an actual legal format exception itself. Okay. So this is one way to check exceptions in this library, but this is part of the assertion. For the assertion, you can do only should, and you can notice the number of matches you have. Okay, should not be, should not have, like many things. Should throw, should be in, this collection stuff, exactly. This should be an instance, should be null, should be a type of. I advise you to go and see about that. But if you want specific videos about like assertion libraries, there is a lot of truth. This one, there's assert K, for example, like many assertion libraries. So this will depend on the team and the style you like. But if you want to use only code tests, that would be fine also because you have many options. Let me show you here something related to instances. Okay, instance mode. I'm going to delete that for the moment. And I'm going to create a context, big context like following. And inside it, I'm going to have two other tests. Okay. So let's pretend we have the following, right? There is something called isolation mode, okay? So how we are triggering this test? We are triggering this one, right? And then we are triggering this one, okay? In this test, should I rerun it without running this one? For example, I can do simple SR, hello, okay? And run the test. What do you expect for this hello? It will run 2 times or only 1 time? Okay, something is not working. Okay, it didn't work. I needed to change it with the word spec, which required this should thing here. So everything is running. So for this one, it will be hello. You can notice that there is 3 hellos, right? There is 3 hellos. Why is that? Because first time it will run, like this one will run, it will run it. Then for this to run, it will have to run it again. For this one to run, it will rerun it again. Okay, so you can make it obvious with what we call UUID. This one, then we just try to generate a random one string. Of course, let's run it. How many UUIDs you expect I'm going to have? I'm going to have 3. Okay, 3 different UUIDs. Okay, this one, because there is 3 execution. When this executes, this is one path. When this execute, it has to execute this. So this is the second path. When this executes, it will be the third path. But let's say you don't want this behavior. You can change it via something called isolation mode. Currently, I'm doing the isolation mode instance per test. All right, I can change it. For this test specifically, I can go here to isolation mode and use isolation mode. And this, for example, I can use single instance. So what will happen? If you run it right now, let me run it. With a single instance, you can notice what I'm having. Here, you will have only this one will execute once here. That's all. We are not going to execute it for this one, and we are not going to execute it for this one. And this sometimes can cause trouble because let's pretend I'm using this UID here. Okay, I'm generating UID here. And then, or database, for example, and I'm altering the database here. Hello, UID. The problem with this approach is that when I change, for example, I add things to the database at this level, this test will see it. So this will be problematic. This one will run perfectly because it doesn't depend on anything related to our class. As you can see, it's working even though I run it from here. So you can notice that, hello, this is the same thing. Okay, it's executing as part of this test, of course. So, but you can see they are sharing the same thing. A lot of the times you don't want this one. Actually, good characteristic of unit tests, they should be kind of separate. This is the actual meaning of unit inside unit test. Every unit should be separate for this one, right? So usually after each test, we remove things from the database, we reset the database. So this one, because sometimes this one tests unless there is things into the database. So if this adds things to the database, it will make this test pass. So this is a side effect, okay? So this, sometimes you need it. So this will be dependent on you. Okay, you notice that there is single instance. There is instance per test, as we saw. So if you run it again, instance per test. So for each one, we will have it. And this is considered as another test. So for that reason, we are going to execute it 3 times. So this one will have different instance for this one. Okay, I had to show it here. So we will have 3 different UIDs here in this case. So there is, okay, 4. We have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. All right. So for this one, you are going to see this one. For this one, you are going to see this one. That's fine. Now, for this one to execute, it has to create another one and pass it. Okay, it's not another one. Actually, the same one is used. So this is the one for here. And this is the one for here. And this is actually running it without running any other test. So you can notice it creates an extra thing. The last one, which is per leaf. So you can actually map what are the unit tests you are having. You are going to have something with test 1 again and something with test 2 again. So there are 2 leaves at the end. So this will execute only 2 times. We are not going to execute the first one here. So it will be only 2. Still, this UID and this UID will be different. Okay, so this one will be different than this one. And we won't have any other execution because this one doesn't execute on its own. It needs to be part of a leaf. Okay, you can set it here for this test, or you can set it as part for this isolation mode. You can set it here, or you can set it as I'm doing it here, instance per test. Okay, so sometimes you need that feature. As I said, these capabilities of such a library allowing us to do certain stuff on our own. This is what driving me to make this video and share this library, because a lot of people sometimes need this kind of flexibility to run certain tests. All right, so this is regarding isolation mode. Another thing a lot of people do is which is called parameterized tests. Parameterized tests, we needed parameterized tests usually to run one test several times with different parameters. Beauty is that since you are in Kotlin, you can simply do the following. You can do, like, for example, let's pretend I want to run this test many times. But here's one thing. You can do list of, and you can have, for example, this one. And for each one, I'm going to run this test this time, for example. Let me remove this one. So it will be simply that string. Okay, I can do the following, for example, to make it clear. Test it or test name, for example. And then I can use this parameter, of course, inside this one and create my test. You'll see I have 3 different tests. This is beauty since you are in Kotlin. Okay, what's this one? That's a new sign. Test with interpreter name cannot be reused the plugin. Okay, that's exactly because we are changing the name, because you can't guess it here in the plugin. You can see, right? Okay, so you notice we can do it like the following. There is an actual better way. This is, they call it something called data-driven testing, something like that. It's actually just parameterized test, but here you would need this framework. It's called dataset. So what you can do something called with data, like the following. This is the beauty. So you can create with data, let's pass our list like that. And this, it will have a simple string. And for this one, I can do directly this thing, guys. So it's testing. So I can remove everything. I don't have to do it by hand. Now I can run it and it will execute it 3 different times. Now it is up to you on how to specify how you are going to name the test. By default, you are going to see the default version of the tests will be named. Okay, A, B, and C. Here there is a parameter that's called exactly named fn. So you can do the following, name fn. Okay, so this will be an actual lambda. So it will give you the string that you are going to pass, which is this one, and you can return a string. So I will take hello testing it. So this it will be that A that is being passed. So if I run it right now, you will notice that I can name it like that. Hello testing AB. Or I think there's another way that is called map. Instead of passing it like that, you can pass map of, and here you can pass the test name to the test data you like, A, for example. Then you can specify this 1, 2, 3. Let's call this A, and this B, and this C. So you can notice C and B. Let me remove this one. So here it will be the second one. If I change this one to int, for example, 5, it will be that int you can notice here. Now that's the beauty. So you have many options. As I said, this is one of the cool things. As you can see, this is the thing. As I said, this is one of the cool things that allow you to customize certain things, and they are much flexible. This is called, in their terms, data-driven testing, but actually it's just parameterized testing. We want to run one function with multiple parameters, or you are testing one thing with multiple parameters. All right. Another feature they do have, which is an awesome thing, which is fail fast. Let's say we have 3 tests here, right? And if this fails, this one won't be executed. So you can enable it by fail fast like that, true. And then I think this one needs to be part of context. Okay, so we need to put fonts back here. And let me just put context, test context like that. So once everything is here, okay, you can also do it from config. Here there is fail fast, right? You can give it true. Okay, let me just delete it because I don't need it. I already did it here. You can basically put it for each context you have, and then if you run it, this wouldn't pass, right? So this will be ignored completely. This is very fast. Sometimes you need it. Maybe you don't have to run this test because, you know, if this is failing, I need to deal with this one. This is an awesome another thing. Here in the library, there are many things. I suggest you to check the libraries. There is non-deterministic testing. Okay, that's awesome. Another feature. There is, for example, this will try to run this thing, for example, 5 seconds. It will try to rerun it in 10 milliseconds until 100 milliseconds. You can specify it like that also, the interval. And if it passes only one time, it will consider it as passing. Eventually it will pass. Okay, there is continually, which is the reverse. It means this code shall pass every 5 seconds during that 60 seconds, because this one will be re-triggered by the API. You can specify 60 seconds here, and I think it will run it every 10 milliseconds. Exactly, this block will be executed every 10 milliseconds. So I need this to always pass. If it only fails one time, it will crash for you. The test will fail. Okay, there is until retry. There is many things here in the integration part. You can integrate mocking and Jakuku. Mocking is simple. It's just simple. You add the mocking. Here you need just to pay attention to the isolation mode. And there is factories. This is simply as what we call it. It's named contract test. Yeah, contract test. So let's pretend you have an interface that has many implementations, right? And we sometimes do it for, let's say we have fake implementation and correct implementation for something in memory database or repository or certain stuff. And you want to write one test, but it will apply to all of those instances, all the implementations. You can do this with contract tests. So here, the example, we are implementing this with list and we are implementing this with a vector, for example. You can write a test for the list, but you have to rewrite, copy and paste this test for also the vector. What you can do, you can write it only once and create. This is kind of contract test. We used to implement it by hand, but with this library, it's pretty fast actually. You include something like that. It's called word spec. This is factory, and you tell it which test. Of course, you have here to accept the abstract type and test it. And then in terms of testing, you can use your word spec and use the include and tell it. This is simply will be just a simple function. Okay, you pass it the test names because you have to pass some names, of course, and then the implementation. Here, the implementation it will be a vector and a list. Okay, so that's pretty much it. Like this is great pattern you can use for this thing. And there are many things. As I said, this is an awesome library. You can try to use these resources. Temporary files you can close. You can use temporary files. You can close things with auto close when you have things that you need to auto close it by each test completion. This is fine. This we need to implement the auto closable library or auto closable interface. So there are many things. Finally, for the extension part, there are many extensions for us Android developer. There is another extension here that is Android. Exactly. Here, this guy implemented code tests for Android. Have runners, assertions, and extension to run Android instrumented tests. Okay, you can try this one, so you can use the code test in your Android project. It has many things, it's not just instrumented runner, but specific assertions for Android also. And there are many things, test containers. You can use it for Ktor, for Coin, for example. There are specific things to, I saw HTTP Kotlin, right? There is Kotlin fixture, like many extensions you can use, and you can copy and use them in your project. It has many features, it has many stuff. Just check them and see what works for you so you can add it to make writing good tests and creating a suite of tests pleasant, because quality of our code base will be dependent on the quality of our tests, and the easy refactoring of the test, the easy usage, extension, and the running of those tests will make sure that our code base will stay healthy. That's pretty much it for this video. If you want me, as I said, do a video to cover assertion and property-based testing, let me know in the comments below. Thank you very much for watching this long video. I hope you enjoyed it. Thank you again. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel, and always see you in the next videos. Salam alaikum.